Hi everyone, this is Annie Santacoy, and this video is just going to be some class updates, critical reading examples, and discussion of Educated. A couple things I want to say before we start is make sure that you are checking announcements on our Canvas, class page, and also check your Canvas inbox because I'll regularly send you reminders of due dates and new lectures, so just make sure that you check those. Also, if you haven't taken the reading quiz for week 8, make sure that you do that. I posted it in the middle of the week, so I'm not sure if some of you saw it, but it is due this Sunday, October 11th. So I graded all the exams, so you should have your grades back for exam 1. Most everybody did really well, so proud of you guys for that. But there were a few things that I think everybody sort of missed the point on that I just want to remind you of and just clear up for you guys. So on essay question 2, a lot of people made the mistake of arguing that education shouldn't affect social equality. But the question is, does it affect social equality? And some of you said, no, it doesn't, but really you meant, no, it shouldn't, because right after that you talk about how it does affect social equality, like people without a college education maybe not getting paid as much, not being able to go and sometimes live the same quality of life as somebody with more education. You talked about how society will look down on people who don't have a college education, and all of that is proof that it affects social equality. And then you go to say, so it shouldn't. So I just wanted to clear that up. Education 100% does affect social equality, and you could have provided examples from that by, the TED Talk we watched about the teacher who teaches us at poor school. So you could have talked about a lot more than just college education. It's all education, education from pre-K to graduate school. Next is globalization. I feel like most people missed the mark on this one, but most everybody gave some sort of definition and tried to tie it to the liberal arts, so I didn't count off for that. But what I wanted you to remember was that globalization is a lot of things, but globalization is global competition between countries and global competition for wealth and development, and technological advancements create wealth. So a lot of countries and a lot of governments are encouraging everybody to study STEM fields, and they're discouraging liberal arts fields because they don't see them as useful. They think that we should only focus on making money and that a sort of old-fashioned education just isn't useful anymore. I also wanted to remind everyone that the liberal arts are more than just art and humanities. It's also sciences, so it's all of the humanities and sciences as well. Lastly, I just wanted to remind everyone, do not plagiarize. I expected people to look things up online. It was an online exam. But if you do look things up, please put it in your own words. And actually, it would be in your best interest if you just referred only to the book and to class notes. Because that way you're drawing from what we're talking about, which is how you should be answering the question, and you're not drawing from this really broad definition online. But it's very serious, so please don't copy and paste. Please use your own words, your own thoughts. If you do want to put down a definition that we used in class, you definitely can. Just quote it and reference where you got it, and then provide some explanation in your own words. But whatever you do, do not copy and paste. Don't even use the same phrases if it's not straight from class or from the book. Okay. Next, I wanted to talk about assignment 4. That will be a roughly 5-minute informative presentation about whatever topic that you chose and created an outline for. That will be due at the end of week 9, so coming up. And we want you guys to have a slideshow, but then also have your audio recorded over it, ideally. If you can't do that, we'll present you with some other options, but ideally it'll be something kind of like this lecture. And you guys will turn that into us, and then I think week 10, we're gonna create a discussion forum where you can just post that and your classmates can watch your videos as well. And if you've never done any sort of recording before, we will post a couple recording tutorials, so don't worry too much about it. You can also find a lot of information on YouTube about how to work PowerPoint and things like that. So, I also wanted to remind you that exam 2 is coming up. That's in week 10. It's going to be short essay and multiple choice, kind of like the last exam. We will post a study guide, just like the last one, and it will just cover everything since the last exam. Pay really close attention to Educated, the book that we're reading. Really think about it, because you will have to write about it in the future on the exam and in a future paper. So next I wanted to talk about applying critical thinking. If you guys remember, in the week 6 discussion, I asked you all to look at and pick one of 2 videos, or to find your own, and I wanted you to analyze the language and the presentation of the video. And I'm just going to go through that assignment with you guys, and I'm going to cover the Marlboro cigarette ad, just to show you kind of the process of analyzing a book or a video or just whatever text that you're analyzing. And I also just want to say that this is my interpretation. It's open for debate, so you don't have to take everything as fact. But here we go. So the first question was, what is the purpose of this video? Well, it's a Marlboro cigarette ad, and the purpose of ads are to sell things. So the purpose was to sell specifically Marlboro brand cigarettes, not just cigarettes, but Marlboro cigarettes. And this is important because this will tie into the argument that they make. Everything that they do is to try to influence you to buy their brand of cigarettes. Next, I asked, who is the likely creator of the video? Well, it's an ad, so it was created by the Marlboro Tobacco Company, and it's very important to recognize that too. It's an ad, right? So whatever that they're trying to argue or sell, it has a motive. They want to get you to do something, so they're going to employ tactics that may not always be logical. They're going to employ arguments that aren't always logical, because people aren't logical all the time, and it's really easy to trick us by manipulating our thinking. So next I ask, who is the audience? Well, based on the character and the setting and everything, and knowing what I know about ads, I'm going to say that the target audience is men. And this is because when you watch commercials or any sort of ad that's trying to sell you something, a lot of the time they're trying to get people to relate to the ad, to feel like that the ad is talking specifically to them. So a lot of the time, the ad will portray this character that is maybe like a better version of you, or a better version of whoever they're trying to reach. Maybe prettier, tougher, stronger, whatever. And in this case, the character they portray is kind of this relatable, kind of tough guy. So the target is men. So next I ask, are there any illogical jumps or associations? And right off the bat, I just remember that at one point he says, smoking and working go together. They just go together. And he leads into this after talking about working on his car, so he's establishing that he's like a hardworking guy, probably middle class by looking at the background. And the narrator asks him what he does while he works. And he says, I smoke Marlboro cigarettes. Smoking and working just go together. And he offers no explanation for that. They just present that argument to you, and they want you to take this character at his word, because they want you to think that he's a real person who really thinks that, and not just somebody that they made up. But even if he was a real person and not this constructed character that was made to convince you of something, even if he was a real person, smoking and working just go together is not any sort of argument. That's an opinion, it's not a fact. So that's an illogical jump right there, or an illogical association. Next, I combined two questions into this one, but how does it try to convince the audience? And does the video make any assumptions about the audience? And we kind of been talking about this the whole time, but remember I said that ads try to show relatable or ideal characters so that you feel like you identify with that character. And so if you identify with that character, you then want the product. Because if it makes the character happy or it makes him better, then maybe getting the product will make you better also. So the main theme that I find behind this whole ad is that it assumes that men want to be more masculine. And I didn't put this in here, and I didn't put it in the discussion question, but this may be before your time. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Marlboro Man, but the Marlboro Man was originally this down-to-earth, handsome, hardworking, tough cowboy. And the Marlboro cigarette ads would always show this tough cowboy working and then smoking a Marlboro cigarette. And so this ad, that cowboy, the Marlboro Man, is just this trope. It's this character that Marlboro used over and over again because they wanted people to believe that manly men smoked Marlboro cigarettes. And this ad is just a more modern portrayal of that, or it was a more, I guess, realistic. So that's how it tries to convince the audience. It tries to convince the audience that you should buy Marlboro cigarettes if you're a man, because manly men smoke Marlboro cigarettes. And that is not any sort of argument, right? But let's go through the last question anyway. Do we have good reason to believe what the video is saying? Well, let's look over the critical thinking and the critical reading rules that Daniel Poole gave us in his last lecture. So, 3 main points that I pulled from his lecture are: ask questions about the argument, look for the reasoning and or the storytelling style, and look for the connections. So as we went through this assignment, we asked questions about the argument. I asked you guys questions about how the video was made, who was it made by, what is the message, what are they really trying to say. And we also looked at reasoning and storytelling when we tried to figure out if there were any illogical jumps in the argument. We looked at the storytelling style because the imagery of the ad is a big part of the argument, a big part of the purpose of the ad. We get this character, this masculine guy, and that's part of the storytelling style. And then looking for connections, we made connections between the character and the purpose and the audience. And I got a little bit ahead of myself here, but what is the argument? You should smoke Marlboro brand cigarettes if you want to be a manly man. And we found connections between the imagery, which is the storytelling style, and the language, which is the reasoning, to discover the purpose or the messaging. Another question you could ask about the argument is, why is the argument being made? And that is, the company wants to make money. So does it follow critical thinking standards? Does it have all of the things that are listed here? Well, I think we could talk about this all night, but I think three of the easiest examples of explaining why it doesn't follow critical thinking standards are that it lacks relevance, it lacks logical correctness, and it lacks fairness. And it lacks relevance by making illogical arguments, or it lacks relevance by preventing evidence that has nothing to do with the argument. And this is tied to logical correctness, but the fact that they use the character to try to convince you to buy cigarettes. Being tough and being manly and working on your car doesn't really have anything to do with why you should smoke cigarettes. And the only reason people thought that is because companies were pushing that idea. It also lacked logical correctness in some of the things that were said, like smoking and working just go together. That doesn't make sense. And finally, it lacks fairness because the creator of the argument had an obvious motive. The company wanted to sell you their brand of cigarettes. So, do we have good reason to believe what the video is saying? Do we have good reason for our beliefs? Absolutely not. The argument is flawed, and the creator had an ulterior motive. So next we're going to talk about Educated by Tara Westover. We were supposed to read chapters 6 through 10 this week. If you haven't already, make sure that you watch Instructor Poole's introduction to the book. You can find it in last week's module. He does a really great job of setting up the book. So I'm just going to cover some general things that happen in chapters 6 through 10 and some general themes. I'm not going to cover a lot of specific things because if you want to know exactly what happens, you're going to have to read the book. But in chapters 6 through 10, we find out how controlling and reckless father can really be. Tara's father. He often puts the family in danger, we find out, like more often than you would think. And you find out also that the oldest kids are actively trying to get away from the family, either by going off to school or getting jobs and just not being around whenever Tara's father comes to gather up everybody to go work. And we come to realize that Tara's father would rather have his kids work for him than study or play. And he's really restrictive in what he'll allow his kids to do. He doesn't allow Tara to have what we would see as normal hobbies, except for maybe one. She doesn't get to hang out with, other kids that aren't like them. She doesn't get to go to school or do other more normal things because her father doesn't trust basically the rest of society. We also see Tara's mother change in chapters 6 through 10. In the beginning, she is a little bit resistant to Tara's father's beliefs. She's a bit more mainstream than he is. She still thinks that people should go to the hospital and that herbal supplements are just supplements, and that you should always go to the hospital or consult a doctor for real medical emergencies. But in chapters 6 through 10, she becomes more extreme in the way that Tara's father is extreme. Earlier in the book, the family gets into this horrible car accident, and Tara's mother is really badly injured, and after that, her memory just isn't ever right again. So she starts doubting herself as a midwife, and she starts doubting herself in everyday things. She doesn't trust her memory. And she goes from being this really almost practical and self-assured person to somebody that just is really unsure and doesn't trust herself. And since she doesn't trust her own memory, she starts to rely on other methods of finding out a truth. She gets really into spiritual healing, and that's something that she didn't trust before the accident. or at least that's the way that Tara saw it. Also during this time period, we see Tara's family get injured constantly, but Tara's mother never takes the children to the hospital, and she's seen by the family, and especially by Tara's father, as the healer for the family. Another big thing that happens is Tara's brother Tyler leaves for college, and Tara becomes interested in education, kind of because of it. But she really has to hide this interest in education because her father discourages it so much. Whatever learning she does get to do, she has to do all on her own and totally in secret. And when she does announce to her father that she would like to go to school, her father just completely ignores that. Just completely doesn't even acknowledge her. So I wanted to talk about some bigger themes as well. There are a lot of dichotomies in Educated, and a dichotomy is a division and a contrast of two apparent opposites. It's whenever a text will put two things next to each other in contrast over and over again to be a big theme. And some really big dichotomies that I think are in this book are knowledge and ignorance, truth and delusion, and freedom and abandonment. In his introduction, Instructor Poole kind of mentions this too when he says that there are a lot of beautiful things right next to terrible, terrible things. It happens over and over, so as you read, see if you can find some examples of these dichotomies, or see if you can find your own big themes, your own dichotomies. Some other things that I wanted you to think about are education, obviously. That's a big one. The book is called Educated, so that is a huge theme in the book. Distrust is another one, and so is inequality. So as you read, make sure you're thinking about these things, and as you read about the events that go on in Tara's life, think about why they matter, what it says about the bigger picture. Because this book is not just about Tara's life, and it's not just a story, it's commentary on society. It's trying to get us to think about more than just one person's life and one person's experiences. There are lots of different ideas in this book, and it's a memoir, so it's a true account that was fact-checked, but it's also a story, which means that parts of it are left up to interpretation. You know, literature is written in a way that is supposed to make you feel something or, think something. So this memoir is more than just straight facts, so make sure that you are reading critically. In literature, there's this literary theory called reader response criticism. And basically what that means is every text, every video, every book, everything is meaningless until the audience brings meaning to it. So you, the reader, are creating meaning by reading the book. Without your own experiences and your own understandings, the book would just be a jumble of facts. It wouldn't mean anything more. There wouldn't be subtext to read. But because we each have our own experiences and we all have our own understandings, the author is able to communicate more than just the words on the page. She can tell us a story that's deeper than ink on paper. So your opinion matters. Your thoughts really matter. And as you read, you need to make notes about connections that you see in the book, connections to topics that we've discussed in class, because we've been thinking about them, and what you think about the topics that we've been discussing should really impact your understanding of the book. So write your thoughts down in the margins, in the pages of the book, or in a notebook if you're the kind of person that hates writing in a book. Make sure that you take note of passages, paragraphs that seem important but you don't quite understand. And also just take note of passages that you really like, because we can talk about them.